I'm Lily Barrett, and I was 18 when my world flipped upside down at a family dinner in Austin. My twin brother and I had just gotten accepted into the same biotech program at a top university. I was over the moon, clutching my acceptance email like a lifeline ready to share the news. But before I could open my mouth, my mom set her fork down and looked at me, her eyes cold. "We're not paying for your college, Lily," she said. "You don't deserve it." My dad nodded, sipping his wine like it was just another Tuesday. I sat there, gut-punched, my plate untouched, as they turned to my brother with smiles. "We got you something to celebrate," Dad said, sliding a set of keys across the table. "A $300,000 Lamborghini. For him." I blinked, waiting for the punchline. None came. "We're both in the same program," I said, my voice shaking. "Why him and not me?" Mom shrugged. "He's got focus. You're too scattered." Scattered, I'd spent years grinding through science fairs and late-night study sessions to get here. My brother, meanwhile, partied his way through high school, but somehow, he was their golden boy. The keys gleamed under the dining room light, mocking me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood, grabbed my phone, and walked out. They didn't stop me. That night, I decided I'd prove them wrong, no matter what it took. If you've ever felt unfairly sidelined by family, drop a comment. How did you push through? Subscribe for the rest of my story. By the time I packed my bags, reality hit hard. The sting of that dinner, my parents' cold words. Those Lamborghini keys gleaming for my older brother Tucker Barrett still burned in my chest. I stood in my bedroom, shoving clothes into a duffel, replaying my mom Virginia Barrett's shrug, my dad Lawrence Barrett's nod like I was invisible. I wasn't going to beg. I'd figure it out. Austin's biotech program was my shot, and no one was taking it from me. I spent nights scouring scholarship websites, my laptop screen glowing in the dark. I applied for every grant I could find, $500 here, $1,000 there, some so small they barely covered textbooks. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. To make ends meet, I picked up 2 jobs. Mornings, I slung coffee as a barista steaming milk, while half-asleep customers barked orders. Afternoons, I worked as a lab assistant, cleaning pipettes and logging data for grad students. The pay was barely enough for rent, let alone tuition, but I kept going. Quitting wasn't an option. My friend Claire Dixon offered her couch in a cramped Austin apartment. "It's not much," she said, handing me a spare key, "but it's yours." Her place smelled like burnt toast and had a sink that leaked, but it was better than staying under my parents' roof where I'd be reminded daily who they chose. I moved in that week, my duffel bags barely fitting in her tiny living room. Claire didn't ask for rent, just split groceries. She'd crack jokes about my coffee-stained apron, trying to keep my spirits up, but I could tell she saw the weight I carried. The day I left home, my parents didn't even show up to say goodbye. I stood at the bus stop, checking my phone, hoping for something, a call, a text, anything. All I got was a message from Mom. "Be smart." 2 words. That's what I was worth to them. I stared at the screen, my throat tight, feeling like I'd been erased. Tucker was probably out cruising in his new car while I was hauling my life in 2 bags to a stranger's couch. I shoved my phone in my pocket and boarded the bus. If they thought I'd crumble, they were dead wrong. Starting college was a grind. The biotech program was brutal: lectures on gene editing, late-night problem sets, and professors who didn't care if you were drowning. I sat in the front row, every class notebook filled with scribbles, determined to prove I belonged. My classmates had shiny laptops and parents wiring them money for rent. I had a second-hand Chromebook that crashed if I opened too many tabs, and a bank account that hovered near zero. Every dollar I earned went to tuition or bills. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Some days I'd catch myself thinking about that dinner, the way Mom's eyes slid past me, how Dad didn't even flinch when he backed her up. It wasn't just the money, it was the message. They'd bet on Tucker, their golden boy, and left me to fend for myself. I wasn't sure what hurt more, their words or their indifference. But every time I felt like breaking, I remembered why I was here. I wasn't just chasing a degree. I was proving they'd underestimated me. Claire was my lifeline. She'd drag me to late-night taco stands when I forgot to eat, talking about her graphic design classes to distract me. "You're tougher than they think," she'd say, tossing me a soda. I'd nod, but the ache didn't fade. I kept my head down, worked my shifts, and studied until my eyes burned. The scholarship checks started trickling in, covering chunks of tuition, but the loans piled up too. I was walking a tightrope, one misstep from falling. Still, I kept moving forward, fueled by a mix of spite and stubbornness. My parents thought I didn't deserve this. I'd show them I did. 6 months into college, I was running on fumes. The biotech program at my Austin University was a beast, endless lectures on CRISPR, lab reports due at midnight, and exams that made my brain ache. I was juggling 2 jobs, racing from barista shifts to the lab, barely sleeping 4 hours a night. My bank account was a roller coaster, dipping low enough to make me skip meals some days, but giving up wasn't in my blood. I'd promised myself I'd prove Mom and Dad wrong, and that fire kept me going. One afternoon, I dragged myself to a guest lecture, my notebook already a mess of scribbled equations. That's when I met Martin Lowe, my biotech professor, a guy with a sharp mind and zero patience for slackers. He was presenting a research project on gene sequencing, and I stayed late to ask questions, my voice shaky from exhaustion. "You've got grit," Martin said, eyeing my worn-out sneakers. "Join my lab team. We need someone like you." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. A professor saw something in me. I signed up that day, determined to make it count. Martin's lab was intense. He pushed me to master data analysis, teaching me how to crunch genetic data sets that could predict disease patterns. I soaked it up, spending late nights tweaking code and running simulations. It was the first time I felt like I was building something real. Martin didn't sugarcoat feedback. He'd point out errors in my work like a surgeon, but his nod of approval after I nailed a dataset felt better than any paycheck. Meanwhile, I couldn't escape Tucker. I'd spot him on campus, cruising in that shiny Lamborghini, music blasting, surrounded by his frat buddies. He was living it up, weekend trips to Miami, new designer clothes every week, acting like college was one big party. One day, I ran into him outside the library, my arms full of textbooks. "Hey," I said, hoping for a shred of connection. He barely glanced up from his phone. "Busy," he muttered, brushing past me. It stung, but I wasn't surprised. Tucker had always been their golden boy, and now he was too cool to even acknowledge me. Claire noticed my mood slipping. She'd drag me to coffee shops, forcing me to take breaks. "He's not worth your energy," she'd say, sliding a latte my way. I'd nod, but seeing Tucker's carefree life while I scraped by lit a fire under me. I wasn't just studying to pass, I was studying to win. My grades climbed, and I started picking up small freelance gigs analyzing genetic data for local startups. The pay was modest, maybe $200 a job, but it was mine. I'd sit in Claire's apartment laptop, humming, piecing together datasets while she sketched logos for her design class. Those moments felt like progress. Martin pushed me harder, assigning me a side project to optimize a sequencing algorithm. "This could get you noticed," he said, handing me a stack of research papers. I dove in, spending weekends in the lab, my eyes burning from screen glare. The work was grueling, but it was mine, something Mom and Dad couldn't take away. I started to see a path forward, one where I didn't need their approval or their money. Tucker's antics kept creeping into my head, though. I'd overhear classmates talking about his latest party, how he'd blown thousands on a Vegas trip. It wasn't just the money, it was the fact that he didn't care. Mom and Dad had bet on him, and he was throwing it away. Part of me wanted to call them, to scream, "Look at your golden boy now," but I didn't. I channeled that anger into my work, my fingers flying over the keyboard, turning data into something valuable. Every gig I landed, every data set I cracked, was a step toward proving I was more than scattered. By the end of that semester, I'd saved enough to cover another chunk of tuition, and Martin's project was starting to take shape. I wasn't just surviving, I was building something. Tucker could keep his parties. I had my own game to play, A year later, I had my own place. The freelance gigs had snowballed. Startups in Austin needed someone to dissect their biotech data, and word spread fast. I'd take on contracts between classes, sifting through gene expression patterns for $400 a piece, sometimes $600 if the deadline was tight. The cash flowed steadier than my barista tips ever had. I stashed every dollar, skipping campus parties and takeout runs until I could afford a deposit on a modest studio downtown. It had a leaky faucet and thin walls, but the key in my hand felt like freedom. No more crashing at Claire's, no more feeling like a guest in someone else's life. I hung a single poster on the wall that first night, a biotech infographic Martin had given me, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time, I breathed easy. Martin kept the pressure on in the lab. He'd forward articles on emerging tech, expecting me to dissect them overnight. Push the boundaries, he'd say, reviewing my code with a critical eye. We teamed up on a research initiative modeling protein interactions, and he pushed for me to lead the data segment. I spent weekends running simulations, tweaking variables until the results aligned. When the project wrapped, he submitted it to a conference and added my name as lead contributor. "This opens doors," he said, clapping me on the back. Doors I'd never dreamed of. Professors started nodding at me in the halls, and I got emails from local firms asking about internships. I'd attend networking events in my best thrift find, chatting with execs who saw potential, not pity. Tucker drifted further into the background. I'd catch glimpses of his life through social media, exotic vacations, new gadgets, always with a crowd of hangers-on. He'd post about weekend getaways to the coast, his Lamborghini in every shot, while I ground through my workload. Our paths crossed once at a campus event. He waved vaguely, then turned back to his friends. "No, how are you?" No acknowledgement of the divide between us. It didn't sting as much anymore. Mom and Dad stayed silent too. No calls to check in. No invitations home. Their absence was a quiet confirmation I was on my own, and that was fine. I'd stopped waiting for their approval. Claire helped me settle in with a housewarming plant and some cheap wine. "Look at you, boss lady," she teased, lounging on my new futon. We talked about her design portfolio while I sorted my lab notes, laughing at the absurdity of it all. The freelance kept growing. A biotech firm hired me for ongoing data audits, $800 a month steady. It covered utilities and a bit extra for textbooks. Martin linked me to a grant opportunity for student researchers, and I applied, landing $2,000 to fund my own side project on microbial analysis. Days blurred into progress lab in the morning, freelance in the afternoon, studying late. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was climbing. As Tucker's posts grew more extravagant, I tuned them out. His life was a facade built on handouts, while mine was solid earned. Mom and Dad's favoritism had created that gap, but I no longer cared to bridge it. I had my studio, my work, my future. That was enough. One evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I was sprawled on my studio floor sorting data for a freelance client when I opened the door to find Mom and Dad standing there. Virginia's face was tight, her eyes shadowed with worry. Lawrence stood rigid, hands stuffed in his pockets. My heart kicked up a notch. They hadn't reached out in over a year, not since I'd left home with just a curt, "Be smart" text. Their sudden visit threw me, but I stepped aside, letting them in. The room felt charged, like a storm was brewing. "We need your help," Mom said, her voice sharp as she sat on my futon. Dad stayed by the door, shifting his weight. "It's Tucker," he said. "He wrecked his car." I frowned, waiting for more. Virginia's hands twisted together. "He was racing some stupid stunt and crashed the Lamborghini. It's totaled. Insurance won't cover it because he broke their rules. We need money to fix this mess." I stared, the words sinking in. They'd bought Tucker that $300,000 car instead of helping me with college, and now they wanted me to pay for his recklessness. I crossed my arms, keeping my voice even, despite the anger simmering inside. "You want me to cover his mistake?" Dad nodded like it was a simple favor. "You're doing well, Lily. You can spare something." I let out a bitter laugh. Spare something. You chose him over me. You said I wasn't worth college, but you gave him a car. He's now trashed. Mom's gaze hardened. He's your brother, she snapped. Family steps up. The word family stung like a jab, but I held my ground. I paced the small space, my thoughts racing. Let me get this right, I said, facing them. I worked 2 jobs, slept on Claire's couch, and scraped by to pay for school. You gave Tucker everything, and he threw it away racing like an idiot. Why is his mess my problem? Dad's jaw tightened. We didn't think he'd do this, he muttered. We thought he'd be responsible. I shook my head. You backed the wrong person. I'm not cleaning up after him. Tension crackled in the air. Mom stood, her voice rising. You're so ungrateful, she said. We're asking for help, not a lecture. I met her eyes, unflinching. You lectured me first. You told me I didn't deserve your support. I built this life without you, and I'm not draining it to fix Tucker's wreck. Dad took a step forward, his tone softer, almost desperate. Lily, we're out of options. He could face fines, maybe worse. A flicker of pity hit me, but it passed. You stopped being my family when you picked him, I said, my voice steady. I'm not your fallback. They left in silence, the door closing with a soft thud. I sank onto the futon, my hands trembling. The quiet felt heavy, but right. I'd carried their rejection for years, letting it push me forward, but this was different. Saying no was my line in the sand. I'd chosen myself just as they'd chosen Tucker. There was no turning back. Claire showed up later with takeout, reading my mood the moment she walked in. What happened? She asked, tossing me a soda. I spilled the whole story, their audacity, their excuses, how Mom's words cut but didn't sway me. Claire nodded, her expression fierce. You nailed it, she said, leaning back. They dug their own hole. Let them stay there. I managed a smile, her bluntness pulling me up. She was right. I'd fought too hard to let their drama drag me down. Martin texted the next day about my latest project, his usual no-nonsense check-in. I didn't mention the visit, but his message centered me. My work, my studio, my life. They were mine, built from scratch. Tucker's crash wasn't my burden, and neither was their approval. Standing firm felt like freedom, the kind I'd earned. 3 months after I have a TV interview, things got complicated. My protein interaction project with Martin had caught the eye of a local Austin news station, and they invited me to talk about its potential in cancer research. I walked onto the set, nerves jangling, wearing a blazer I'd borrowed from Claire. The host grilled me on biotech breakthroughs, and I held my own, explaining how our algorithm could predict tumor growth. When the segment aired, I got texts from classmates, even a few professors saying I'd nailed it. For once, I felt like I wasn't just scraping by, I was shining. A week later, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. It was Mom. We saw you on TV. Virginia said, her voice tight. Can we come over? I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. The last time we'd spoken, I'd shut the door on their plea to bail out Tucker's car debt. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. When Mom and Dad showed up at my studio, they looked different, older, worn. Lawrence's shoulders sagged, and Virginia's eyes darted nervously. I braced myself, sensing another storm. We're in trouble, Dad said, sitting stiffly on my couch. Our real estate company, it's going under. We need your help to save it. I stared, my mind reeling. Their company, the one they'd poured everything into while ignoring me, was crumbling. How much, I asked, my tone flat. Mom swallowed hard. 50,000, maybe more. I almost laughed. They'd refused to pay a cent for my tuition, but now they wanted me to prop up their failing business. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You saw me on TV, thought I was rolling in cash, and now you're here with your hands out. Dad winced, but Mom's face hardened. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, she said. We're family, Lily. This is our livelihood. The word family hit me like a freight train. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. You walked away from me first, I said, my voice low but firm. You told me I didn't deserve college. You chose Tucker's car over my future. Why should I save you now? Lawrence stood, his hands raised like he could calm the air. We made mistakes, he admitted, but we're desperate. The company's all we have left. I shook my head, unmoved. You had me, I said. You chose to bet on him instead. I built this life without you, and I'm not tearing it down to fix your mess. Mom's eyes flashed with anger. You're so cold, she snapped. After everything we've done for you. I cut her off. Everything you gave me, nothing but a shove out the door. I'm done carrying your regrets. They left in silence, the door slamming harder than I'd meant. I stood there, heart pounding, feeling the weight of that moment settle. It wasn't just about the money, it was about drawing a line in the sand. They'd abandoned me long before their company tanked, and I wasn't their safety net. I sank onto the couch, replaying their words, but no guilt came. I'd fought too hard to let their desperation pull me back. The next day, I met Martin at the lab. He'd seen the interview and grinned, clapping me on the shoulder. You've got steel in you, he said, his voice warm with pride. That kind of grit. It's rare. I told him about Mom and Dad's visit, the way they'd tried to leverage my success. Martin listened, his face thoughtful. You've carried enough, he said. Maybe it's time to tell your story. Let people know what you've overcome. I frowned, unsure. Like publicly? He nodded. Your voice matters. It could inspire someone else. Claire echoed him when I told her later, sprawled across my futon with a bag of chips. You should do it, she said, crunching loudly. Show the world how you flipped their rejection into strength. Their words stuck with me. I'd spent so long proving myself to Mom and Dad, to Tucker, but maybe it was time to speak for myself. Not for them, but for me. I wasn't sure how, but Martin's encouragement lit a spark. My story wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving despite the odds. When my podcast went viral, everything changed. Martin's words had stuck with me. My story could inspire others. So I reached out to a local Austin podcast, one focused on young innovators. They invited me to share my journey in biotech, but I went deeper. Sitting in a small recording booth, headphones snug, I poured out the truth: how Mom and Dad had refused my college tuition, handed Tucker a $300 car, and left me to fend for myself. I talked about scraping by on scholarships, working 2 jobs, and building a life from nothing. My voice cracked at times, but I didn't hold back. They said I didn't deserve it, I told the host. I proved them wrong. When the episode dropped, I thought maybe a few classmates would listen. I was wrong. Within days, the podcast blew up. It racked up thousands of downloads, then tens of thousands. Social media lit up with comments, people sharing their own stories of family unfairness, praising my hustle and ripping into Mom and Dad's choices. How do you pick one kid over another, like that one post read? Another called Tucker a spoiled leech. The backlash was fierce and it spread fast. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a tale of grit versus privilege. I watched the numbers climb, my inbox flooding with messages from strangers who saw themselves in my fight. It felt surreal, like I'd opened a door I couldn't close. The fallout hit Mom and Dad hard. Their real estate company, already teetering, collapsed under the weight of bad press and worse decisions. They'd been juggling risky investments for years, banking on quick flips while ignoring the market's warning signs. The podcast didn't cause their ruin, but it shone a spotlight on their flaws. Clients pulled out, deals fell through, and creditors came knocking. By the end of the month, Virginia and Lawrence had filed for bankruptcy, their savings gone, their reputation in tatters. I heard through a mutual contact they'd sold their house, moving into a small rental on the edge of Austin. I didn't reach out. They'd made their choices, and I wasn't their lifeline. Tucker hit rock bottom too. His Lamborghini was completely destroyed in that crash. Insurance didn't cover it, leaving a mountain of debt from the loan and repair costs he couldn't afford. Last I heard, he was working as a warehouse stalker hauling boxes for minimum wage. The guy who'd cruised campus like a king was now punching a clock, his charmed life reduced to a time card. I didn't gloat, there was no joy in his fall, but I felt a quiet justice. He'd coasted on their favoritism, never building anything of his own. Now the world had caught up with him. I turned my focus forward. The podcast's success opened new doors, more freelance offers, speaking invitations, even a part-time consulting gig with a biotech firm. But I wanted to do more than climb. I'd been that kid desperate for a chance with no one in my corner. So I took my savings, every cent I could spare, and started a scholarship fund for students whose families had turned their backs on them. I called it the Breakthrough Fund, a nod to the barriers I'd shattered. The first round gave $5,000 to 3 students, covering their textbooks and fees. One wrote me a letter saying it kept her in school when she was ready to quit. Reading it, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. This was bigger than me. Claire cheered me on as always. "You're a legend," she said, helping me design the fund's logo over pizza in my studio. Martin was just as proud, emailing me a link to a journal that cited our project. "You're not just surviving," he wrote. "You're changing the game." Their support grounded me, a reminder that I'd built a new kind of family, one that valued my worth. I never spoke to Mom, Dad, or Tucker again. Their numbers stayed in my phone, but I didn't call. They didn't either. That silence was my closure. I'd spent years chasing their approval, but the podcast taught me something. My story wasn't about them. It was about me, my fight, my strength, my choices. I'd turned their rejection into rocket fuel, and I wasn't looking back. To everyone who's followed this story, thank you. Your support, your messages, they mean the world. This journey showed me that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet victory of standing tall. Self-reliance isn't just survival, it's power. If you've faced something like this, or if my story hit home, drop a comment. Share your thoughts, your struggles. Let's keep this conversation going. Subscribe for more, and thank you for sticking with me to the end.